Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ben Moskalensky Show. Now, we're going to be starting off, topics as always, and we'll be starting off with movies this time. More specifically, movies and actors. And the reason I decided to do this particular topic is because a movie, which I've predicted is going to be below 30%, I predict this. The Emoji Movie has recently come out, very recently, I believe only yesterday it came out. And boy, oh boy, was I not wrong. At the beginning of the day, it was a grand total of 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. And no, that was not an audio glitch. That was not a rounding off. That was nothing. Rounded off to the nearest one. At the beginning of yesterday, the Emoji Movie was a grand total of 3%. Not 3 stars, not 3 stars out of 5, not 3 stars out of 10, but just 3%. Then later in the day, it went up to 6%, which is a double. And that's really kind of pathetic. And that's kind of where it's at right now. If you go to Rotten Tomatoes, look up the Emoji Movie, just like I predicted, and as did many others, a 6% movie by the critics. And the audience gave it 48%, which is better, but it's still not good. And I did my fair bit of research. From what the audience says, it's a waste of money. From what critiques say, critiques, and so on, it's pretty much unanimously agreed that the Emoji Movie is a waste of time and money. So that kind of begs the question, why is this movie so bad, and why did this movie take off so much? Let's start with the second one, because that's the easier question to tackle, and I want to have more time for the first one. The Emoji Movie took off so much because of its concept. I mean, sure, it had Patrick Stewart and a bunch of other famous voice actors, but a lot of movies have that people don't even know about. I mean, when I made my post saying happy birthday to Patrick Stewart, I'll bet you most of you didn't know most of the roles that Patrick Stewart played. And heck, I don't know a lot of them as well, even though he's an unbelievably famous actor. And my guess is some of my listeners don't even know who he is. He's most noted, of course, as Captain Picard from Star Trek: The Next Generation. And from there, he's also done other things. He's a big friend of George Takei and other political activists. And, so on, so on. So very famous, but still very famous figure. I know he's not exactly prominent in our generation, but still, Patrick Stewart, very famous actor. But that's not the point of this. The point of this movie, the reason why so many people were fixated on this movie, was because it was a movie zeroing in on, not just mentioning, not just as a subplot, and even that would be a lot, zeroing in on the emojis. Those little icons that you send on your phone to people to convey some sort of emotion poorly. That's the entire movie. That's what it's about. It's about emojis. It's about an emoji who can do more than just one facial expression, and there's your Emoji Movie. Now, I have not watched the movie myself as of yet, but I have done my insane amount of research on it, specifically for this segment. And what I basically got from this movie is it's not funny, it's boring, and it has some big message, which is never a good thing in a kids' movie. It has like this big message of like how times are moving forward, as is language, and we all gotta adapt to the emojis, and that's pretty much what I took away from it. Which leads back to, so that's why everyone was fixated. That's the answer to the second question, and I guess I kind of also answered the first question of why is it so bad. But this is the thing, and I wanted to kind of like with most of my topics, I typically don't like to zero in on a specific thing. I like to use examples and talk about them for a while, but that they're typically not about my entire topic, with the exception of Star Wars, Smash Bros, and some of my own books. But ordinarily, I use examples, but I don't zero in for an entire section. So I wanted to go a bit broader. This is the problem. And I touched a little bit on this with my last show, which you can go check out, YouTube, SoundCloud, Ben Moskalensky Show. This is the problem with movies nowadays. Big budget. Movies, the more budget they have, the more freedom they have. The more freedom they have, the odds of them being better are not as high. Now, you might say, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, bigger budget means you can get better actors and better graphics. Okay, that's a fair point. You can get fantastic actors, you can get fantastic graphics, but you can do anything you want, because if you have a big budget, that means people already know about this and people are going to come in and start buying this. No matter what you do, people are going to start watching this movie under any and all circumstances. People will watch this movie to no end, or to a very, very far away end. So if you, and I'm actually going to look up the budget for the Emoji Movie. Again, a movie that got 6% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes. The Emoji Movie budget. I'm looking this up right now on Google. So $50 million. Cost $50 million to make a 6% movie. Now, this is insane in my view. And by the way, this wasn't just like some weird deal where everyone else loved it and Rotten Tomatoes hated it. Metacritic gave it 9%. IMDb gave it 1.5 stars out of 10, which is also not good at all, which is, by the way, the equivalent of 15% to those of you who are enjoying summer trying not to do math. My brain's fixated in math mode, but yours doesn't have to be. So 6% from Rotten Tomatoes, 9% from Metacritic, 15% from IMDb, and the very highest rating it got was from the Google users, which gave it 16%. And this is my point about the Emoji Movie had a budget of $50 million, and this is what they did with those $50 million. I'm going to look up Emoji Movie cast. I'm sure they have nothing but famous people. I'm sure they have others too, but listen to this. They got T.J. Miller. They got James Corden. They got Patrick Stewart, Christina Aguilera, and Jennifer Coolidge. These aren't just names. These are huge names. These are big names. And my point is, we need to start getting movies with smaller budgets. Because nowadays everything is fixated on these Hollywood people who people are treating like gods. Like, geez. All right, looks like we have our first caller coming in. Hello, caller. You're on the Ben Moskalensky show. What's your name?
My name is Joe. This is Joe again.
Oh, well, hello. We have Joe calling from Kirkland. All right, Joe. So right now we're talking about movies and how big budget movies typically don't do as well as little budget movies or low budget movies, because big budget movies feel like no matter what they do, they can get it right because they have large budgets. Do you agree with that point, or do you think bigger budget equals better movie?
Well, remember the movie Jurassic Park? They had an extremely big budget, but the movie racked in over $1 million in money from all the people who wanted to watch it. So certainly a lot of people wanted to watch the reboot of Jurassic Park, you know? I mean, and they had such a nice budget that the film was actually pretty good.
Did you say over $1 million they got from Jurassic Park? Over 1 million or 1 billion?
I think 1 million. I don't know. It was a long time ago I read it. But
you realize the Emoji Movie got more money than that, right? It can't be that. I'm actually gonna look this up. How much money? It has to be so much more. How much money did Jurassic Park get? Because it's not 1 million. It's 600. No, it's 350 million.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there's no way. Movies don't make $1 million anymore. And this is another thing, by the way. We have to stop treating our celebrities like gods, like Greek gods. I mean, Brad Pitt is going through a divorce, I think, and everyone's talking about it like it's the biggest thing since Moses parted. You know, it's like since Moses parted the sea, kind of a deal. You know, Moses parted the sea. That's an interesting deal. Since the dinosaurs exploded, that's probably what people think in our modern day schools, is that the dinosaurs all exploded one day and Moses parted the ocean. not just like the sea, and like he just put a ridge through it. That's it. That's probably what they're teaching him on day schools. But that's a separate subject.
In school because separation between church and state.
Oh yeah, that's right. That thing that actually isn't in the Constitution. Not well. Actually, I don't disagree with that point. That's fair. But anyways, as I was saying, so my point is, have you ever heard of a movie called The Usual Suspects? Well, here's the thing. The Usual Suspects. I'm gonna look up the ratings for this movie, and whatever the ratings are, it's not high enough. If anybody's looking for a masterpiece of a movie, you gotta watch The Usual Suspects. It's an absolutely outstanding movie. And here's the thing: 88% on Rotten Tomatoes. That is garbage compared to what it actually is. I would give it 95% easily, because it was just such an amazing movie. And you want to know the budget for that movie?
Yeah, sure. What is?
$6 million. You want to know how much it grossed?
Yeah.
About 20.
How much did they make?
Let's see here. Well, the numbers that I'm looking at right now are varying. Let's go to, say, IMDb. They probably have the answer. But my point is, yeah, opening weekend, they got $600,000 opening weekend, which is already 1/10. And it kept going up. Like by August 20th, 1995, which is not much later because the movie came out in 1995, so same year, they had over $1 million. And then it just kept going from there. And it looks like, yeah, they've just been getting more and more money to the point where it just keeps doubling and tripling. The more you look at as the months go by, the gross just keeps doubling and tripling and so on and so on. And my point about this is, I think when you have a small budget, it forces movie creators to get creative. And that's actually a fantastic thing, because that's what happened. The Usual Suspects didn't have that high of a budget, and they just got so unbelievably creative. Sure, it didn't have the best special effects or anything, but it was just such a well acted, well done, super clever movie that it didn't matter. What's another great movie? Let's look up Godfather. Let's go the original Godfather before it took off. Godfather 1 budget. And then I'm going to show you Transformers: The Last Night budget. $6 million as well. Godfather, and I'm not even talking about Godfather 2. I'm talking about Godfather 1. 1972's Godfather 1 was the same as The Usual Suspects. $6 million seems like it's the magic number. And my point about it is, that was another masterpiece. This time, I think Rotten Tomatoes rated it fairly. Do you want to know what Godfather got on Rotten Tomatoes, Joe? No, my audio is working clear. Do you know what Godfather 1 got on Rotten Tomatoes?
No, yeah, sure. No, I do not know.
99%.
All right.
99% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's what percent it got out of 100. That's like 9.9 stars out of 10.
Okay, your audio right now is ripping my ears. It's really choppy.
I'm telling you, it's not. It must be something on your end of the line. Are you using a landline?
Not a, yeah, I think so. No, it's not a landline, no.
Well, that's probably the issue. Anyways, if you'd like, you can drop out of the call, or you can stay. It's completely your choice. Anyways, as we move.
So,
all right. Well,
I have to go. The audio is leaving a ring in my ear. We'll see you whenever.
I suppose so. Anyways, as Joe tries to fix his audio, and as we all try to get back on track right before our next section, I'd like to bring up the fact that, once again, Godfather 1 got 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, and mind you, that's a perfect rating for it, because Godfather 1 was just an absolute masterpiece, and it had a budget of $6 million. And before we go into this next section, I'm going to look up Transformers: The Last Night, The Last Night, which is the new Transformers movie. First, we're going to look up its budget. And of course, there are always exceptions to the rule, but typically not. All right, looks like we have our next caller. Hello, caller. You're on the Ben Moskalensky Show.
Hello there, Ben.
Hello. I haven't heard this.
You don't remember me?
I think I do. My therapist said not to think about this voice.
Oh, well, let's see if we can ring a bell. Imagine eating 500 fidget spinners that are spinning at 1 million miles per hour.
Wonderful.
Imagine eating 5 millipedes that give birth to 3 centipedes each in your stomach.
I need specific earmuffs just for you.
Imagine stubbing your webbing of your foot in a corner that can cut diamonds.
Yeah, I really love some of the callers on this show.
Imagine eating 3 tons of poo-poo without throwing up.
Wow, you're making my job an immense amount of fun.
Imagine drinking your own pee for 3 weeks and 1 day on end. You have to hold it all in and you cannot take any medication afterwards.
As I block this number, I'd like everybody to please keep any children below the age of any age preferably out of this video as an entirety. I mean, at least so far we're getting a fair number of calls, both from ordinary people and from mental asylums. Caleb, was it?
Oh, you got it correct.
Thank you very much for calling in. Please never call again. Anyways, right now we're moving on to our next section, which is going to be about books. But in the meantime, since I haven't said this yet, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. Once again, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. So if you don't know how to call in, that's your number. It's also in the description. It's on SoundCloud. It's everywhere. Just look for that number. All right. Anyways, so we're going to be talking about books right now because very recently I was in an interview. Is there a lingering spirit by chance? No, there isn't. He just hung up. Wonderful. Very recently I was in an interview with my dad, but still interview about my most recent book on Amazon, the Hawker'sMemoirs. And I actually talked about this on my last show, so make sure to go check that out. And we were talking about basically, well, pretty much everything there is to talk about regarding the book without giving away any spoilers. And so I'm going to be talking about not only that book, but as it nears its end, Hero of the First Islands, which is the book I'm currently working on. Another interesting thing, book-related, that's happened to me recently is I've met one of my favorite authors of all time, Greg Hurwitz. I met him in real life for a Q&A, and out of the 30 people who showed up to go meet him, I asked about 55% of the questions, which is fair since Journal of the Survivor 2 is about to start, and it's a very similar genre to the Orphan X series. And the second book in that series, The Nowhere Man, is my second favorite book of all time, which is incredible. Because if you guys are looking for a great read, look up Orphan X. Amazing, just amazing stuff by Greg Hurwitz. But first, let's do a bit of backstory. So Hawker'sMemoirs, I believe I talked about that already in a previous show and throughout my Google+. But let's talk about Hero of the First Islands, which is going to be my next published book, which should be on Amazon in like a week or so. Hero of the First Islands, yet again, another first-person book. But this is a more child-friendly book, more like for ages 6 to 8, 6 to 9. Not like Winnie the Pooh material, but not too much higher. More of a kind of a little bit darker, a little bit more realistic fairy tale, if you will. And it's your kind of the general theme of it is pretty typical, but what I do with it from there is much cooler as I go into like much cooler protagonists and antagonists and stories and two sides to a story and all that sort of stuff, rather than just a stereotypical fairy tale-esque kind of feel to it. But the general concept is there's this boy who doesn't know civilization. He's on an island. He meets this girl who gets shipwrecked there. The name of the boy who's writing in his journal, Jim, he's the main character, meets up with Sammy, who I named after the person who I was doing the show with a couple shows back, make sure to go check that out. The Ben Moskalensky Show, Show 5. And they're basically trying to prevent an ancient prophecy from being fulfilled, where if the 5 hated swords, which is an acronym, gets put in the ocean, well, hated or death swords, depends on how you look at it, but if they get put in the ocean at a specific time on a specific day, then an ancient evil will rise up and take over the world. That's the basic premise of it, and from there things go from there. That's not much of a spoiler, because before chapter 1 is even over, you know all of this and more. Much more, actually. So now I'd like to jump back to Greg Hurwitz for a bit and some of the questions I asked. And we're going to be talking about what makes a good book. So one interesting question he had, or I had for him was, and I'm going to be doing my own questions and other people's questions in general, and I'm going to be putting this in retrospect to my own books and to any of you who would be interested in writing, not necessarily for a book, but for fan fiction, school, or anything else. And we're going to be starting with what makes a good antagonist. People have been talking about what makes a good protagonist for the last 80 centuries. I mean, a good protagonist has to be likable. They actually have to be the good guy, and so on and so on. And by the way, don't use the term good guy unless you're writing a 2-year-old book. Use the term protagonist and antagonist. The protagonist generally having the better views, if you will. Or the more morally correct. Depends. The good guy, if you'd like to really boil it down. But what makes a good antagonist? What makes a good yang to the yin? And that's a really great question, in my view, because and the answer, in my view, is even better. First of all, you got to make your antagonists think they're right. I mean, the whole, whatever, evil or insane, it's been done to death. And you could add that as parts of it, but not as a driving force. They could be greedy. They could have motives. They could be able to justify to themselves. They could just even not be that bright. But the two excuses of like darkness in their soul and they're just evil people, and they're insane, like the whole psychopath serial killer thing, it's old and it's been done to death, and it's not that creative. Laying it flat on the table, you can still make those elements, but not primary features. And again, I'm just reiterating what Mr. Greg Hurwitz said, who makes some of the best comics and books that I've ever read, if I do say so myself. Which brings me to my next point. Again, the antagonist should be sort of kind of a mirror reflection of all the dark sides of your character. And that's actually one thing I had already known ahead of time. The first part, I just didn't do it anyway due to my own thinking. I didn't think it would be cool. But he just kind of reiterated my own thoughts. But as for the second one, that's one I'd already came up with myself, is the fact like your antagonist should typically be like looking in the mirror at the bad sides of your protagonist. And spoiler alert, but let's look at, well, actually, let's go back to Journal of the Survivor here. Let's look at Hannah Holloway and Oliver Crone. Hannah Holloway, as I said, is not a perfect person, and I don't think so myself. And there is actually a good guy in the book who I do not personally think is Hannah Holloway. It's actually another character, but it goes without saying that Oliver Crone is the antagonist. He's one of the main antagonists, and he's my personal favorite, not only antagonist, but character in the book. But he's meant to be the yang to Hannah's yin, if you will. And I hope yin is good and yang is bad. I'm not like saying it purposefully wrong to throw people off or anything like that. I believe yin is good, yang is bad. If I'm wrong, then in that case, he's the yin to her yang. I mean, again, it just goes that way. But let's look at all of her bad characteristics. She is her primarily of which she is not a very brave person. This has always been a big deal in Journal of Survivor, which I thought was cool, because even with, characters have faults, like they feel guilty for killing, or they're not strong or something like that. but they can take it all, or at least they can try to take it all. But that's the thing about Hannah Holloway. She doesn't want to. She can't. She just doesn't want to. She's like a normal person, and most people aren't that brave. And that's the thing about her, is she also is not that brave. And in some scenarios she is, but like she has backed off of situations where she did not do the right thing for her own safety, or just because she didn't want to. And that's one of the main things that's wrong with her, at least as she makes it seem. I think she has bigger issues, but that's, again, what it appears to be in the book itself. And Oliver Crone is the opposite. He is not afraid to do whatever he feels is necessary to get the job done. Hannah Holloway is not that way. She's also not a very outgoing, talkative person. Again, Oliver Crone is a perfect counter for this. He is a huge extrovert without being annoying. He's very polite, and so on and so on. So that's just an example. There's more, but I don't want to dig up the rest of the section to talk about it. And if you have any ideas for what makes a book and its characters good or bad, the number good or bad, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. Once again, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. Now back to the topic at hand, which is, once again, books. Another good question is, how do you make a good action sequence? And what I mean by this is, I have had some amazing action sequences and some really stale and boring feeling ones. And the thing, unlike my villains, which I had already guessed and I just wanted reassurance, I had no idea what really separated them. The quality of writing for them is all about the same. Obviously, the events themselves are different, but they're still all exciting. They still have all the research necessary. They're still just realistic enough. The gore is just how I want it to be in all of them. Everything, it seems, is doing it right. And I asked Mr. Hurwitz, how come some of my action sequences are better than others? And he said, you need your action sequence to reflect the character themselves, or the protagonist themselves, or their scenario. And that makes so much sense. The situation can't just be some random deal. It needs to feel like it's an investment. It needs to feel like there's a reason for it, and there's a reason it's there. It can't just be some little randomly thrown in thing. And that's pretty much his take on it. Sorry, I keep stuttering. I still have like, I don't know. I'm still kind of in a mental shock state after that horrible last call we had from Caleb. But if anyone has any better calls, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. Once again, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. Now, for the last couple of minutes, let's get back into the topic at hand, which is books. And by the way, I'm probably going to be leaving a link in the description or something like that to the Hero of the First Islands book whenever it comes out, which can happen at any point, but pretty soon here. And then, of course, I'm going to have a section on Journal of the Survivor 2 and Hero of the First Islands, most likely on our next show. But that's our next show. Our final question for the day. Sadly, we didn't have as much time as I thought we would. I'm still in the 2-hour show mode. But our final question is, overall, what makes a book enjoyable, or what makes the research in the book seem necessary without taking away or adding some weird stuff to the book, like while still keeping it enjoyable, but without adding some deal to the point where it becomes like a technical manual. And Mr. Hurwitz replied, it has to be put into perspective, again, of what the situation is. So everything has to tie back to the character. Your situation ties back to your character, and your research ties back to your situation. Everything needs to tie back to the character, and the book should really be about the test of the character, of the protagonist. And in my view, that's perfect. It needs to be a test. Because if you have some super soldier going around doing everything perfectly, it gets boring. That's one of the reasons Nowhere Man is so good, Orphan X and Nowhere Man, In the words of Greg Hurwitz, you never get to see James Bond go home. That's the thing. He's like this superhero. And that's why some of the James Bond films aren't as good as others, is because I'm not saying all books should be emotional, touchy-feely stuff. I personally don't like that myself. But it has to have more, it has to have a certain amount of human in it for it to still be enjoyable, but not be so human that it's like a vlog. And right now we are moving into our section, our free-for-all section, third section of the show. I had some ideas for this section, but I think it has to be reiterated with another person. I think that's the best way really I can phrase it. So if anyone would like to talk, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. Now, before we do that, just a couple of real quick stories, because once again, what I would like to talk about in regards to more of the conversation aspect is something that would be better if not just participated in the comments, but if someone actually called into the show and talked about it live on the show with, yours truly. Now, recently I was in camp. That was, yeah, that was an interesting experience, because camp, I had 2 camps this summer. One of them was a 3-hour-a-day camp. The other one was an overnight camp. And oh my gosh, am I not ready for an overnight camp. Because overnight camps are the very definition of pain. And what I mean by that is the physical exhaustion. No matter what you do, there's always physical exhaustion involved. Did you feel how boring that last segment was? That was just, I mean, those last couple of minutes. It's just unbelievable how exhausting it is. I don't know how people do it. It's overnight. I mean, it's just, you wake up at 7 a.m. to go to like some ice cold polar bear pool. It's like, it feels like, the polar bears are gonna jump in. It's called polar bear swim because it feels like polar bears are gonna jump into the pool. I mean, it's like unbelievable. And some of the people there were great, and some of them I hated. I got hit on the head. I got multiple injuries actually, and I just had to come home barely under halfway through because I couldn't do it. I just physically couldn't do it. So this is kind of going to tie back to don't do anything you do not want to do unless there's a very good reason for it. I was kind of iffy on this camp, but I decided whatever, YOLO kind of a deal. Man, am I going to think through more decisions like that in the future, because I still have aches. I came home Wednesday morning because I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I by the way, I came in Monday, middle of the day of Monday, so it wasn't even a full 2 days. And I just decided I just couldn't do it anymore. I was just too physically and mentally exhausted, completely drained. And you just shouldn't do anything you want to do. Like as an example, I went to go see this this movie, Dog's Purpose. I just despised it, honestly. I mean, I just really didn't like it. But I went there for my friend, and honestly, the experience with my friend outweighed the level of how much I didn't like the movie. Even though I did try to get her to change the mind about the movie, those first 2.5 hours were grueling. But the rest of it I got to spend with her on her birthday was just, it was just so much. It was just so great that I would totally do it again. But here's the thing: the compensation factor. There's always a compensation factor. Everything has a good side and a bad side. And I mean, in this case, the good sides just couldn't outweigh the bad side. Yeah, some of the people there were great, and I'm still trying to get in contact with one of them. But I'm not gonna like physically hurt myself any more than I already did by continuing to go through that camp. But still, I think it was a good idea that I went there. Because it was a chance to go outside a bit, something I am very hesitant to do. But yeah, it was an overall pretty interesting experience. I have some interesting stories that I'll be posting on my Google Plus collection. But the message is you gotta take everything into consideration. You gotta weigh stuff as it is. Like as an example, here's another great example. My sister and her friend, they were gonna go see the Emoji Movie today, and I talked about the Emoji Movie earlier on the show, and it's amazing. It's really great ratings. Those wonderful 6% ratings. Less than 1 star. 1/3, less than 1/3, 1 star. And it just, I mean, it just like I was just kind of begging, and it was just unbelievable. But eventually, they went to go see Spider-Man, new Spider-Man. It wasn't great, but I'm sure it would have been better than the Emoji Movie. Anyways, we have our next caller coming in. Hello, caller. What's your name?
Hello, my name is Samantha.
Are you okay? It sounds like a prank call. Is this a prank call?
No, it isn't.
Yeah, this is, or no, this isn't.
This is not a prank call.
I see. Well, interestingly enough, it sounds like you're speaking through a helicopter, like one of those 1940s microphones going through a helicopter propeller. Is my audio?
I'm really sick, so
What?
that's probably why. I'm really sick. That is probably why.
All right. Well, hey, no one's forcing you to call into the show. Anyways, this next part, and again, feel free to stay, go as long as you want. No one's forcing you to do anything. But this next segment of the show, I would find really interesting. And here's the thing. I talked about this on my last show, and it's basically about comedy and what the line should be. Now, in your view, let's start with the base question, because I really love this topic for some reason. In your view, does comedy have limits to the point where it just goes from not funny to like just completely offensive? Or in your view, is all comedy okay?
Well, I think any comedy's okay, but during like this time, like during this time, movies and TV shows, if they go too far, then it might offend other viewers.
We're not talking about other viewers. Do you personally think any comedy, be it racist or sexist or offensive to people with diseases, do you think that is all okay as long as it's funny? Or do you think there is a thing as offensive humor and it just goes too far sometimes? In your view, not other people's.
In my view, I think that it's kind of okay, only if it's funny, you know, but sometimes it can go a little bit too far.
But you do think there is a line that is too far. You think when it gets into like say racist or like remarks like PewDiePie made, that stupid joke he made about the Holocaust, like you think that is too far?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is because nowadays for some reason I always like to say that I'm part of either the worst generation or the last generation, because I don't know what is wrong with people these days. I mean, at this point there are no lines on comedy, especially on YouTube. It's either everyone is so oversensitive about everything that like what we have now on YouTube, where you say anything against even anything. Like I'm okay with offensive humor as long as there are boundaries. There have to be boundaries. But if you say anything, like let's say against a political movement, not racist, not sexist, just against either side, well, against the Democratic Party, since YouTube is very liberally owned, but if you say anything that is even an opposing opinion, not necessarily like xenophobic or racist or sexist or anything like that, but just an opposite opinion, now it's just getting censored. But we also have people on YouTube who can just do these outrageous things, like this horrible, outrageous, completely offensive, totally insensitive humor, and they just get away with it. Like I talked about. Sorry, what?
Can I say something?
Yes.
Um, can I say something really quick?
Yes, it's a show, so yes.
So okay, this is the same deal with Kathy Griffin, right? She posts an offensive picture of President Trump's head, right?
Yes.
And she's median. She thinks that's okay, and she's on the far left side. She gets away with that from media because a bunch of people hate President Trump for being racist and all of that stuff. And so if a liberal posts something like that, then they get away with that from everyone. And if you're a Republican or on the right side, conservative, and you post something against, like, let's say Hillary Clinton, or Barack Obama, or all the other people, they will not agree with that. They go too far from the boundary. And Kathy Griffin, since she's a comedian, she thought posting that picture in media was kind of funny, but she kind of got away with it at the end.
In my view, she got what she deserved. She got fired, she got publicly humiliated, and she was under investigation by the Secret Service at one point. In my view, Kathy Griffin got what she deserved in that particular scenario. But
Yeah.
people have varying opinions. On the other hand, but there's always two sides. We don't have people who, or very few people, who treat comedy nowadays as either, like, there's very few in between. I'm totally fine with wiggling room. Like, I like to make jokes about, in my personal life at least, I like to make jokes about like the whole what's a good example? I'm just trying to think of, like, what do I consider to be middle life? Obesity. I love to make jokes about fat people. And I'm fat myself, so, and I'm not in denial about that since I literally just said that. So, and I'm totally fine if anybody makes jokes about it with me. But if you're not okay with fat jokes, that's totally fine. But that's not where, that, in my view, there are certain lines on both sides where just like you're crazy for thinking this is offensive, or you're crazy for thinking that this is not offensive. There are certain lines on both ends, and now people are just stepping so far past them, it's not even funny. But let's go back to the people are crazy for thinking a certain thing is offensive. Do you have anything to say before I do that?
No. Go ahead.
Thank you. And by the way, if you are feeling too sick to call in, please do not feel obligated to put your own health at risk just for the sake of this show's listeners. Although I and the show's listeners do vastly appreciate it. So anyways,
Okay.
Recently there's been a kind of a scandal, if you will. This was brought to my attention live on the last show with a YouTuber called Stampy Longnose. He makes whatever Minecraft Let's Plays or something, and he's not a weirdo, unlike many of them. There are all the Minecraft YouTubers had like investigations into them at one point because half a dozen of them were like criminal or something around that lines. And he, no problem with him. He's totally legit. 7 million subs, going strong. No problems with Stampy Longnose. Stand-up guy, stand-up YouTuber, kid-friendly humor. And at one point, I guess he likes to do Minecraft videos. So he posts this picture as his thumbnail of a Minecraft map. And because the general shape of it is like, it looks 0.5% like a swastika. And I'm talking, you'd have to specifically look at it to see it that way. It was brought to my attention. I would not have seen it as a swastika unless it was mentioned. And there was no mention in the video. It's not like what PewDiePie did, that idiot, where he mentioned the joke, the stupid racist joke and everything else. There was no mention of it whatsoever. It's just the way the map looked, and the colors were all wrong, and everything was wrong. It was not a swastika. And people just went nuts over this thing. I'm actually going to post the picture publicly after this so people can see it. It's just completely insane how people just either completely overreact or just totally underreact to certain things. Like, there are some people, in my view, like, let's look at Milo Yiannopoulos before we go into our final section. Let's look at Milo Yiannopoulos. I was pretty into the guy originally. I thought he was a cool kind of stand-up guy. He's one of these. He used to be the senior editor for Breitbart. You know what Breitbart is, right?
Yes, I've heard of it.
Well, to those of you who don't know, Breitbart is one of the biggest conservative media outlets on the internet, if not the biggest, with the exception of Fox News. And Breitbart, at one point, one of their top senior editors was this Milo Yiannopoulos, and he was this like very right-leaning, very conservative gentleman from Britain. And the whole deal was, I believe he was a minority. I believe part Asian or possibly gay, something like that. But the whole deal was like, that was one of his talking points of like, I am a minority and I have not lived oppressed. But at first I was totally into the guy, and then I saw this one article he wrote where he was writing about this one he was writing basically about women. I forgot the exact deal about the article, but the consensus of the article was basically, yeah, the whole civil rights movement with women was dumb. Women belong in the kitchen. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, a lot of people on, you know, the left and right, they say the other party is racist and sexist, but and luckily he was fired, but having representatives like this totally shows it. And the thing is, too, with all of these lines being blurred with comedy, with all of these offensive lines being blurred, we don't know who's racist, who's sexist, and who's just a normal person anymore. Do you see what I'm saying?
In my view, like, the way I put it between political comedy, I make funny jokes like that too, except I don't cross the line. Like, the only things that I make fun of is mostly like cartoons and all that. Nothing political too much, but like, I'm not going like all the way to like over the line, you know?
Exactly. And that's just the thing that amazes me, is that now we have these lines being blurred so much and being rearranged, and now to the point where some people get away with pretty much anything. They can do anything, they're going to get away with it, no problemo. And other people, they do almost nothing or nothing at all, and they just get severely punished for it. Anyways, maybe we'll do another topic on this at some point. Samantha, it's been great having your call. If you'd like, you could stay. If you'd like, you can go. Well, right now we're moving on to our final section. We're going to have to cut that one a bit short since we extended this one, but for the next 12 minutes, we're going to be talking about video games, and more about what makes a game enjoyable. We're going to be zeroing in on that, and I'm going through my yearly replay of Ocarina of Time right now. I'm going to explain what that is in a second. But before I do, if anyone other than Samantha would like to call in, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. Once again, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. Samantha.
Okay, so
Well, wait, I didn't ask the question. I didn't ask the question yet. I wanted you to make sure you're still here.
I know, but I'm just gonna say I'm gonna let you go now. So.
Oh, you're leaving?
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much, Samantha, for joining us. It was a pleasure having your call. And if anyone else would like to call in, once again, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. I'll get into the number again a bit later, but I just want to get started with this last section. So, bye. So here's the dealio, everybody. Ocarina of Time is a freaking amazing game. Don't listen to what anybody else tells you. Almost everybody agrees on this, but there's always going to be one freak who says it's not the case. They are a liar. Ocarina of Time is one of the best games ever made. And I'm going to get into why and what makes it so good. And I'm going through my yearly replay right now. I've had the game on the 3DS ever since it came out, and I believe it was 2011. But don't quote me on that. I'm actually going to check that right now. of Time on the 3DS come out. I know the original, I believe it was 1998 when it came out. Yeah, 2011. And the original came out in 1998. Ocarina of Time on the 3DS is one of the most masterfully made, masterfully everything game of all time. It's a perfect 5 stars easily. 8 stars out of 5, no question in my mind. Probably in my top 3 games of all time. And again, this was a game originally made in 1998. They hardly changed anything for the 3DS version as far as I know. And that is because, firstly, it's gameplay. Ocarina of Time has some amazing gameplay because a lot of games, they get so focused and they intend so hard, they like focus so much on the story that they kind of lose sight of the game itself. Like BioShock 2 is an example. It's one of those deals where you have severe difficulty spikes by the developer that just feel completely overlooked. Ocarina of Time has none of that. The story is still extremely prevalent, and I think it's one of the first games to have a very prevalent story. But my point is, it's like it has an unbelievably strong story while still keeping the gameplay element, which is something even developers now, with all their graphics and high budgets and voice acting, all that sort of stuff, even now developers are losing sight of gameplay and story need to be intertwined. You can't have one vastly overshadowing the other, or else the experience becomes ruined. Once again, a game like BioShock has the best story I think I've ever seen. The gameplay is okay though. Whereas you look at a game like Super Smash Bros. 4. Where's the story? What happened to Brawl? Brawl was better. Meta Knight is not OP. Neither is Fox from Melee. If anyone tells you that Brawl and Melee are balanced games, they don't know what they're talking about. But my point is, all the Smash Bros. Games have such good gameplay, but the only one that had story, and my favorite of them, is Brawl. Because Brawl had a great story. And that's something that Smash 4 should have done as well, a story. Doesn't have to necessarily be the same story, doesn't have to be Subspace Emissary again, even though Subspace Emissary is great. But still, so many games nowadays are failing to find that perfect line between gameplay and story. And it's not two separate things. It's one intertwining thing. And Ocarina of Time just does that perfectly. Another thing, characters. Oh my gosh, are the characters so cool. Even some of the worst characters like Zelda or Impa or Saria, who none of which I particularly like, they're still really cool. And that's the thing too, when a game can find how to make characters cool while still keeping them fantasy-like, while still keeping them realistic. And you got to find that perfect balance. Again, another thing Ocarina of Time did. And you go to places like the Goron. You go to like Goron City. You go to Lon Lon Ranch. You go to Cucurico Valley. You go to places like that in the game, and there's such a nice feeling of friendliness there. Even though the game, and by the way, Ocarina of Time was also extremely forward-moving, if you will, in its humor. It was cynical, but it still kept things family-friendly, which is pretty cool, actually. But one of the great things about Ocarina of Time was all its unique characters and everything, because there are just so many good ones. I can't even begin to list all of them off. Not even just the main characters like Link and Ganondorf and Sheik. Well, I'm not going to go into Sheik because that's a huge spoiler, but not even those characters. And yeah, Sheik was cool. Forget what everyone else tells you. I liked Sheik. But I mean, it's just such a cool experience. You really feel like you can connect to these characters. Another thing, the urge to move forward. With some games, you don't really want to move forward. You don't want to keep progressing, keep expanding, keep moving forward through the game. There's no sense of progression and everlasting fun. Like you look at a game like No Man's Sky. I know No Man's Sky is I know No Man's Sky is pretty much my punching bag at this point for this show. But still, No Man's Sky, the first couple hours are so cool, and then you just kind of lose it. You see planet after planet after planet after planet after planet after planet after planet, and it just gets boring, and you just kind of want to stick around and see if anything changes. Maybe Sen will come by if you're lucky. Maybe you just want to turn off the game, and that's it. There you go. $60, everybody. But with the game of Ocarina of Time, you're constantly pushed forward as the story keeps evolving, as the characters keep getting better, as relations keep getting more interesting. There's this everlasting sense of progression throughout the game, which makes you just want to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing through the game until you reach an unbelievably satisfying climax. And I know I'm getting really into this, but heck, we have 5 more minutes on the show, and we're going to use them, baby! But in the meantime, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. Once again, the number is 719-284-5873 with the pin 24777. And I'm just going to run down the list in general. So if anybody's looking for a new game, please get Ocarina of Time if you guys haven't already. But I'm just gonna keep going through the list and tell you about what it did right. Next on, mapping. I know this doesn't seem quite as important as some of the topics I was bringing up earlier, but hear me out. You look at a game, actually mapping and menus, because those two can kind of go together. Mapping and menus. You look at a game like Mass Effect Andromeda. This game kind of mixed on. It was a pretty cool game actually overall, but there were just so many boring menus where you make your own gun. You gotta go through all these things to make your own weapon. You gotta go through these intricate little boring details and this grinding. Oh, it's an open world game now, except for when it isn't and you have to walk in a perfectly straight line. Whoopee! Isn't that fun? In Ocarina of Time, there's nothing like this. Even though it's still open world, there's no deal where like you can't go in this area. You can go wherever you want, and if you can't, there's a reason for it. Like there's a mountain there, or there's like a sign that says no entry or something like that. It's not just like an invisible wall put up there. No invisible walls. You feel like you can go everywhere throughout the game. You feel like you are invested in this. And the same thing applies to the menus. Although you have a variety of choices throughout your items, there's still recommended items, and there's still a general path. You don't have to go through a million different processes to get what you need to get the best items in the game. You just have to move through the game and do pretty good. There's no annoying, repetitive game or grinding. I mean, there's none of that. And that's one of the things too. There's Video Game Donkey. I talked about him as well. He's like the better edited, non-child friendly version of me during my video game sections, because our points are almost about 3/4 of the time we align, maybe a bit more than 3/4 of the time. We're pretty much on the same page. But one of the things he brought up, which I didn't think about myself, which is a fantastic point, is like why you want small but open maps. Is because when you have small maps, everything is much more centered. You feel like you know where to put stuff. It's easier to keep track of stuff. Again, no repetitive grinding and boring walking as the hours just go by. So it's easier to get to places, but you still want some breathing room. And again, there should be no like weird invisible walls or game-breaking glitches. There should be an explanation for every reason you cannot go somewhere currently. And that's one of the things that Banjo-Kazooie also did very well, is the feeling of like you can hide whatever you want in a certain area and you can actually make it possible to get. Like and they have a ton of Easter eggs in Ocarina of Time. One of the major ones I've found is like if you look, actually let's do the least spoiler filled one. If you look through the window of, I believe it is Zelda's castle, you can see the paintings from Mario 64. I mean, how cool is that? So that's another thing with mapping and menus. And I believe that'll wrap it up, and just on time as well, since we're at the end of the Ben Moskalensky show. Once again, make sure to go buy Hawker's Memoirs. And again, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time only has one story, one fixed difficulty. And every year since I bought it in 2011 when it came out, I've played it every year. So this is my 7th time playing it. I am still not sick of it. That's how you make a good game. When I can play it every year and still not get sick of it. How many games can you name that can do that? Because I can only think of one, and I have not played Breath of the Wild yet, so sadly I cannot comment on that. But from what I hear, it's even better than Ocarina of Time, and I just can't imagine how. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining me. This is another really good show. I'm going to work on the topics for the next show. Hopefully I can finally get some stuff converted to SoundCloud. And yeah, that should do it. Thank you, everybody.